Okay, let's talk about this op-ed that came out in the New York Times yesterday. Before we get going, I just want to say I don't fault the New York Times for running this op-ed at all. If I was running the opinion page of a major publication and members of a former administration's economic team proposed doing an essay for me talking smack about a major news-making industry, I'm going to say yes to that every time. That is what op-eds should be doing, so it's fine. However, to the writers of the op-ed, Ryan Cummings and Jared Bernstein, as you can see here, they were economists working in Joe Biden's administration. I just want to harp on a few points within this essay. Crucially, one of the most important points is two different times in here, they talk about how the cryptocurrency industry wants to integrate with the real economy so that later they can ask for bailouts when things go wrong. Now, this is a weird argument. First of all, it's a weird argument because why would companies come out and say our big aspiration is to go under and then have you save us? Second of all, no one in crypto has ever talked about a bailout. Lots and lots of crypto companies have gone under. None of them have ever gone hat in hand to the United States and said, please bail us out. We need you to save us, United States. Most crypto companies are VC funded. VC funded companies don't need bailouts. They aren't funded by debt. So when it goes wrong and the company isn't working out, they just close up shop, give their investors back any money that's left over. And if there's not money left over, no harm, no foul. VCs know how this works. There is just no evidence that these companies have ever sought bailouts. Here's another time they talk about it here. And should the market nosedive, stick to taxpayers with the bill. What's weird about Democrats talking about this is the biggest round of bailouts of any of our lifetimes was led by a Democratic administration. It's almost as if Democrats like to talk about the threat of bailouts because they feel guilty about the gigantic moral hazard that Obama created when he completely bailed out the banks. Obama did not have to bail out the banks the way he did. There's a great book on this by Simon Johnson called 13 Bankers, and it goes into a lot of detail about how Obama walked into office with every intention of just holding the banking industry harmless, even though they should not have been held harmless. There were options on the table in order to deal with the financial crisis without just completely letting the financial industry getting away with it. And Obama opted not to take those options. And so it was Democrats who invented bailouts. And weirdly, ever since then, they love to go around and constantly argue that industries are bad because they're going to want bailouts, even though no one has ever talked about it before. A couple other points I want to talk about in this essay is this notion of crypto wanting to operate without any of the consumer protections that commonly accompany such securities. I don't think these guys actually even know what the consumer protections that do accompany securities in the United States are. When you hear something like consumer protection, I know for me, what that reads as to me is one of two things. Either that means there's someone out there saying this kind of product or this investment is or isn't safe for consumers. Like, we're not going to let this hit the market. There's consumer protections about safety regulations for automobiles. There are cars that U.S. regulators won't let people build and put on U.S. streets. They say, no, we used to build cars without seatbelts. That isn't allowed anymore. That's a consumer protection. So we assume when you hear a phrase like consumer protection that there is someone saying, this is okay, that's not okay, as if every security that's for sale in the United States gets a seal of approval by the SEC. But that's not how it works at all. The other way in which someone might think what consumer protection means is like, well, if I'm an investor, I am protected from my investment going down too far. Like, for example, how if you have a deposit in an FDIC insured bank, if that bank goes under, you are insured up to a certain amount of the deposit. You're insured up to that level. So you're protected even if the bank goes under. Nothing like that exists in the U.S. securities market. That is not what consumer protection means here. All that consumer protection means is that investors have adequate disclosures in order to decide whether or not they should or shouldn't invest in a given security. We have a transparency-based regime in the United States. The role of the SEC is to create the lists of disclosures that people need to create a registration scheme so that if you're going to sell a security in the U.S., The SEC knows that you're going to do it. And that's all they do. They don't say it's good or it's bad. This is a good stock. This is a bad stock. They just say, okay, we know you are selling a security. You have registered with us. And under registration, you have got to provide these kinds of forms of information. And for the last 100 years or so, that regime has worked. But blockchain's come along. It is a genuinely different technology. It needs a new set of disclosures. And so companies have been going to the SEC for the last several years and being like, look, we would be happy to operate under a disclosure-based regime, but you got to tell us what to disclose because our financial assets don't work quite the same as stocks and bonds. The big difference being one company can launch a token or a coin, but it doesn't mean they're going to run it forever. These things decentralize over time. That never happened with prior companies. We need a way to deal with that. Well, what happened under the prior administration, under the Gary Gensler SEC, is companies would go to the SEC and they would say, either we want to invest, we want to register this investment product, tell us how to do it, or in the case of companies like Kraken and Coinbase, they would say, we are a venue for trading these financial assets. We want to register with your agency so that we can provide the information you need so that you can know that our markets aren't being manipulated. And the answer that the Gary Gensler SEC gave in both cases is, yeah, thanks for meeting with us. We're not going to register you under any circumstances. We're not going to tell you what kind of information that we need for blockchain assets. And in fact, we're going to sue you and try to knock you out of existence. So contrary to this notion that the Trump administration is rolling back investor protections, there have never been investor protections written for the blockchain industry. No one has ever sat down until now. The Atkins SEC is in the middle of doing this, but no one has ever sat down and said, what do investors need to know before they buy a coin or a token? You might think coins and tokens are stupid and no one should invest in them, but in the United States, that is not what the Congress has instructed the SEC and the CFTC to do. It's not for them to pick winners. It's just for them to decide what kind of information investors need. And in fact, this has been so serious that Coinbase actually sued the SEC to write rules for them. They said, look, you need to allow us to register in some way. You need to tell us what kind of disclosures we need to provide. You need to tell us what kind of information we need to share with you. The SEC refused to do so. And the refusal was so egregious that when Coinbase took that refusal to court and showed it to a judge, the judge was like, Coinbase is right. You need to try again, SEC, or you need to actually write rules. The truth is there just isn't regulations for this industry. And the prior administration explicitly refused to register them. So it refused to regulate them. It really is that simple. At the end of the essay, these writers say that this industry may be running out of time. It might be. Look, I don't buy that. I think Bitcoin will be here until the heat death of the universe. I don't think Coinbase or Kraken are going anywhere. I could be wrong. Let me know. And if I am wrong about that, please feel free to call me on it. But I would like to ask these guys. I would like to ask Ryan and Jared if they have the intellectual honesty to go ahead and make some kind of objective commitment. If this or that were achieved, then I would revise my view on cryptocurrency. Maybe it's just if Coinbase doesn't blow up, in the next 5 years, maybe I have to admit that there's some there. Maybe they weren't running out of time. Like I said, maybe it is real. Maybe if stablecoins reach a certain amount, maybe if Bitcoin hits a certain price. But I don't actually believe that Cummings or Bernstein are willing to do that. I don't believe they have the courage of their convictions to make some kind of bet in which they would roll back their view on this topic. No matter what, they're going to say till the end of time, kind of like Paul Krugman has, that it's just a matter of time until all of this falls apart and all of it's doomed. This is a failed administration that is trying to rewrite history to make it look as if they didn't do basically everything wrong, as we all know they did. And the last thing they did wrong was write this very wrong and misguided essay.